To everyone who's been following along all this time, and to everyone who's just joined in recently, welcome. I can't believe it, my first project is actually finished. Hard to believe as that is. And I'm not going to get all loud and act like it was the greatest Let's Play in all of existence. But for a debut, it wasn't half bad, don't you think? Right now, though, I want to do something a little different. I want to talk a little about my background with the game I've just finished, how it's affected me, who I was and who I am today, and how it ties into something that I think is familiar to many of us. There won't be any fancy visuals or gameplay with this one, so feel free to sit back, maybe even tab over to something else in the meantime. Just be sure to listen. When I was younger, really young, like 5 or 6, I was, let's just call it, unusual. I was really sheltered. I didn't get out much, thanks to not being the most sociable of kids, and also thanks to some overprotective parents who really didn't want to screw up their first kid. I was pretty smart though, or so they tell me anyway. And up through then, I didn't know video games were a thing. Sheltered oldest child, remember? Then at some point, I want to say it was the summer after I got out of kindergarten, I got a hand-me-down Game Boy from a cousin, and 3 games with it. There was this basketball one, a Spider-Man game, and Kirby's Dream Land. I played all 3 of them, of course, but it was Kirby that captured my imagination the most. The visuals, the upbeat music, all the varied, fantastic locations, or something like that a 6-year-old would have said. I still didn't take the full jump into being a gamer, though, until that Christmas, when I was surprised to get something called a Super Nintendo Entertainment System, bundled with a little game called Yoshi's Island. Talk about starting off on the right foot, huh? Those of you keeping count, though, might realize the N64 was already out by that point. I had no idea, and I didn't end up caring for another couple years. From then on, though, video games were a huge part of my life. I ventured into other genres, adventure games, RPGs, the occasional sports and fighting games. I grew to appreciate the thought that went into them, the worlds that were created and the stories told. Though I did branch out into other games on other systems occasionally, I was and always have been more of a Nintendo fan. Their style, their approach to games, their desire for new, fun, interesting experiences has always clicked with me. To say the least, video games were a major part of my life growing up. Maybe a little too much. But I'll leave all that awkwardness that came with that for another day. You know, growing up affects gamers in a lot of different ways. We all handle the process a little differently, and the way we enjoy video games changes along with it. For some, they never stop being gamers. It stays a major part of who they are, myself included. Others grow out of it over time, lose interest in favor of other things, and I suppose in those cases, to each their own. Then there are those who, for various reasons, start believing they aren't supposed to like video games anymore, and push them out of their lives whether from pressure or a desire to seem mature, despite still finding them interesting. Some within that subset try to be mature in other ways to compensate, avoiding the games that look childish and jumping headfirst into any that look mature regardless of if they're actually interested in them. We've all seen it happen before. Maybe you were there yourself before, or you were worried you'd have to do it to avoid being seen as immature and getting picked on for it. Although regardless of the reasons we move on from the games that we used to enjoy, the memories stay with us. The games we played growing up, the parts of those games that stood out, even the friends we made through them end up feeling important even after all that time. Our minds have this way of reminiscing about the past, idealizing it, especially about the things that gave us such fond memories. Nostalgia is one hell of a drug, as they always say. And as entire generations of gamers have grown up, we've kept that nostalgia with us. I mean, why wouldn't you remember the first epic final boss you ever fought? Or that level that took you weeks to beat, but left you feeling invincible when you finally overcame it? Or the shock you felt the first time you defeated the Elite Four, only to find out your rival claimed the title of champion just a little earlier? But there's something I've noticed. Something that's bugged me for a long time. While nostalgia isn't a bad thing by any means, sometimes people focus on it a little too much. Sometimes we as a community cling too much to the past. As a fan of a lot of series, I've seen it a lot. Zelda, Pokémon, Fire Emblem, especially Smash Brothers, just to name a few. Among the fans, there are some that are so caught up in their memories that they reject anything new, and they are very loud about it. I'm not saying the games from way back when weren't good, because of course there were a lot of good games. But there gets to be this idea that the older games are intrinsically better just because, and that new games are supposed to play and feel just like them. The level varies between the fandoms, but there's still this underlying current of blind nostalgia that, to be honest, does more harm than good. At its worst, it stifles new ideas, shoots them down before they can ever get going, just because they don't fit into this idealized vision of how things once were. I notice these things, and it frustrates me to no end, often more than it should. Seeing such an instant knee-jerk negative reaction to something just because it's new, and when I see these people so addicted to their nostalgia, I wonder what they're missing out on. Though it may not feel the same as when you were little, there's still so many new experiences to have and memories to make. Modern games have just as much to offer in that regard, if you know where to look. It may not be the exact same, but that isn't a bad thing. In fact, you might come across something you love even more than the games you held so near and dear to you as a child. By understanding the past, but also looking toward the future, it lets us experience the best of both worlds. That's something I want to show firsthand in the coming months and years. The perfect mix of old and new. Thanks for listening, everyone. The next project will be coming along shortly. Until then,